Guts takes this low difficulty.
What the hell are you on about?
What's up YouTube, Ten here, and today we'll be doing something a little different for the channel. You guys know I normally like to do predictions for upcoming episodes, but recently I've kind of gotten out of doing predictions. I really don't see a point, as we're probably going to cover all our bases in the actual reaction anyway when discussing it, if it's an interesting matchup with a lot to talk about. So I've ultimately decided to kind of retire the prediction series. I'll probably still cover every single episode when they come out, but going forward I have no intention to do a prediction every single time anymore. It just it takes a lot of time, especially to edit it. So I'm ultimately going to be saving most of my editing time for reactions and other videos in general. That being said, today's video we'll be discussing the next summon death battle between Dimitri from Fire Emblem and Guts from Berserk. And this episode, unlike a normal prediction, is mainly going to be focused on Dimitri and what he is capable of. Because I've seen a lot of talk amongst the community, and while there are definitely some people who are fully aware of what Dimitri is capable of, I've seen a lot of people be less familiar with Fire Emblem, so I ultimately wanted to provide a source for people to use. I'm a big Fire Emblem fan. I've been playing the games ever since I was 7 years old, and I am very informed when it comes to Three Houses. So going into this, I'll simply be going over Dimitri's stats, his overall weapons, abilities, and everything he has access to.
Do you hear me, Kakarot? I am finally stronger than you!
When it comes to physical strength, Dimitri is physically compared to Raphael, who is seemingly the physically strongest student in the academy. Dimitri's most notable physical strength feat, as Fire Emblem generally doesn't like to show a lot of that, comes from when he realizes his stepsister has betrayed him, and Dimitri literally grabs a man's skull and breaks it in his bare hands.
I do not believe that Maya Fey committed the act of nuking the country of Turkey.
For this section, Dimitri heavily relies on scaling, but getting into it, Dimitri is comparable, if not more powerful than Edelgard, as he is capable of defeating Edelgard in the final act of his story, both in her final Armor Knight class, or whatever her very specific class line is called, I don't specifically remember the name, and in her Hegemon state, where Edelgard essentially becomes a demonic beast. Meanwhile, by comparison, Edelgard has technically never defeated a fully sane Dimitri in combat before, so this scaling is completely reasonable. What is this scaling, mind you? Well, to put this in perspective, Edelgard, for those uninformed, is capable of fighting on par with Byleth, who is powered by an actual goddess, who could rip a hole in reality to escape another dimension, and scorched a valley so thoroughly that 1,000 years later, that place is still on fire to this day. Edelgard has also defeated Rhea with Byleth's assistance, who is a castle-sized dragon who can survive being nuked rapid fire. Not to mention, Byleth's sword is straight up stated to be capable of destroying a mountain, and Dimitri and Edelgard's weapons are made from the same material.
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
When it comes to durability, Dimitri can survive hits from Byleth, Edelgard, and Claude, who should all have mountain tier weapons. Not to mention he can survive magical attacks that can create giant explosions of fire, electricity, light, and dark energy. He can also tank the meteor spell, which is literally just a character ripping a meteor out of orbit and dropping it on Dimitri's head. He again scales to Edelgard fighting Rhea, who can survive literal missiles, and this is not a joke, this is a Fire Emblem game with actual missiles that are launched on Rhea's head. Though it must be noted that Dimitri can be harmed by regular blades. Call it a low ball, call it a downplay, I'm just covering my bases here.
Speed. I am speed.
Fire Emblem Three Houses has a variety of different lightning and light-based attacks, and Dimitri and all characters in the game can dodge them, making Dimitri relatively faster than light, or just faster than light. It varies.
After what you did, I can fit what's left of my son into a meat pie. Let me see your stupid sword!
Dimitri, while heavily focusing on lances primarily as his main weapon type, he is also capable of wielding swords. Getting into this, I will specifically be focusing on roughly 5 weapons, as while Dimitri can technically wield basically any lance in the game unless it's specifically locked to a certain character. Most of them are just, it's a stick, it hit hard. We don't need to go into all of it. I will generally be focusing on the more interesting aspects of his arsenal. Like his first weapon he carries around is a javelin, allowing for long-range attacks, and Dimitri generally carries multiple on hand, allowing him to fight at range if he so feels the need. Next is the Armor Slayer, a sword that can deal super effective damage to those in heavy armor. After that, Dimitri can wield the Silver Lance, a lance crafted from shining silver and one of the most powerful lances in the game. Up next is a Brave Lance, which allows the user to strike twice with every attack. Lastly is his legendary Lance, a weapon capable of destroying mountains.
My magic.
When it comes to using magic for this fight, it's a little contentious for me, as Dimitri in his most canonical class for Blue Lions should not be capable of using magic, though then again in Three Hopes, the spin-off Warriors game, which is technically an alternate timeline, Dimitri is shown to be able to channel electricity through his lances, and Dimitri primarily can use electric and light-based magic, so it's reasonable enough to say he could probably use the spells if you remove the game's restrictions. Dimitri has access to the electric-based spells of Thunder and Thoron, both of which allows Dimitri to smite an opponent with lightning from a distance. Dimitri can also use the healing magic of Heal and Recover, allowing him to heal allies. And while in-game, he's not able to use the magic on himself, in Fire Emblem lore, it's not unreasonable to assume he could use it on himself. So take that as you will. Dimitri also knows the light-based spell of Nosferatu, which will allow him to heal off half the damage he deals to his opponent with this technique. And lastly, Dimitri can use the light spell Aura to unleash a giant beam of light magic onto his opponent. In Three Houses, a unit can also carry around a variety of different items or potential mounts to be used in combat, so I will cover those for Dimitri as well. Dimitri has been seen in basically all incarnations of him to have healing items, like say vulneraries, concoctions, elixirs, you name it. The type of medicine he can use mid-battle to get himself back into the fight and heal off any wounds he's taken. Dimitri is also often shown in the Paladin class when not as a playable unit, showing his general preference for the class. So you could argue Dimitri could be given a mount in this fight and be given his horse. Lastly, Dimitri canonically is shown holding an evasion ring, an item in game that once equipped will give Dimitri more evasion, making him harder to hit.
Counter.
When it comes to skills, this is probably the most contentious part of the video, as technically in Three Houses, Dimitri could potentially become any class line, minus the gender-specific classes, like Valkyrie. So technically you could give Dimitri basically any skill in the game if you really wanted to. For me, I generally stuck to skills that come from classes themed around physical weapons, as that is what Dimitri specializes in. So essentially, any class that has an axe, a sword, or a lance, I will generally be saying he could potentially have those skills. So if you want to go buck wild and give him Miracle and Renewal, two skills that would heavily break this fight, but just so you know what those do, Miracle literally just prevents a fatal hit from killing him. It's random chance if it activates or not, but you know. And Renewal would heal him 20% of his health at literally every single interaction of combat. As for these skills I've selected for Dimitri, we first have his personal skill, a skill that he will always have regardless of class line and regardless of what he chooses to equip. His personal skill is Royal Lineage. This skill grants him an evasion boost when at full health. Essentially, Dimitri becomes 20% more likely not to be hit when he's at full health. The next skill I decided to give him is Defiant Strength. This skill will grant Dimitri a notable boost in power when his health is at 25% or lower. Up next is Death Blow. This skill grants Dimitri a power boost when initiating combat. For this skill to work, Dimitri must be the one initiating combat, and a Fire Emblem combat generally lasts one interaction, so he should likely be proccing this all fight, or let's just say he procs it at the start of the battle. Regardless, it's a power boost. It's another power boost. That's essentially what it does. His next skill that he has access to is Swordbreaker. With this skill equipped, Dimitri is more evasive and more likely to land his blows if his opponent is wielding a sword. And for those wondering, is this really that okay to include, since it's not really on Dimitri's class line? He canonically has it in the Cindered Shadows DLC, so I think it's completely fair game to use, meaning Guts is already at a disadvantage for the fact his weapon is a sword. Next up is the Pathis. I'm a Fire Emblem fan, even I don't know how to say this shit. All you need to know, it reduces all physical attacks by 50% when activated, except for arrows for some weird reason. And lastly, the final skill I gave Dimitri is probably the most controversial one, but it's here to prove a point. Dimitri has shown to be able to use swords in his final class, and Dimitri has shown that he has generally high sword rank in the game, regardless of if you trade him in that or not. So it's not really unreasonable for Dimitri to have access to lethality, which, if for those uninformed, the lethality skill will instantly kill Dimitri's opponent if it triggers. Meaning, if Dimitri hits Guts and this procs, Guts is dead. No ifs, no ands, no buts about it. Based on how it is shown in game, regardless of health, regardless of condition, regardless of class, regardless of species, race, gender, whatever, if this technique hits, his opponent instantly dies.
What techniques? Tell me!
I'm not gonna tell you how to use the Kaioken.
Kyle, what?
Up next is combat arts. Generally, for those unfamiliar with Three Houses, the combat arts are 3 special techniques Dimitri can use if he doesn't want to just hit his opponent with a normal weapon. Though, Dimitri also, thanks to his legendary weapon, has access to a 4th one that doesn't take a slot in game. His first combat art I've given him is the Glowing Ember combat art, which will increase the might of Dimitri's strike based off his defense stat, which, considering he's a Lord unit, is pretty high. Up next is the Whim Sweep combat art, which will allow Dimitri to essentially get a free strike in on his opponent, preventing his opponent from counterattacking this attack. Lastly is his Monster Piercer skill, which is highly effective against monster enemies. Not really useful for Guts, but I couldn't find another skill that I felt was fitting and what didn't feel like me actively looking for an advantage for Dimitri. And lastly is his personal combat art skill that is linked to his weapon, which is Atrocity. This attack is arguably the most powerful combat skill in the entire game. What it does? Very simple. Dimitri hits his opponent with a Master Strike with his lance, and it deals super effective damage to all foes. Doesn't matter what class you are, what resistance you have, doesn't matter anything. It is always super effective against the opponent. Imagine the most powerful, effective thing that could possibly hit you. That is what Atrocity is.
Yes, you made a horrible mess of the blood fountain.
Looks fine to me.
It used to be water!
Onto our last category, we have his crest. For those unaware, crests are kind of a biological, almost magic-esque ability passed through bloodlines in 3 houses. And what Dimitri's crest does will double his attack potency when using a combat art. And Dimitri can activate this alongside Atrocity to deal a ridiculous amount of damage.
Oh, he's dead.
Well, that's pretty much everything. When looking at all of Dimitri's capabilities and information, looking at all of Dimitri's potential weapons, skills, and his overall power set, I find it really funny that a lot of people think Guts can win this fight. The only advantage Guts has is experience. That is literally it. Dimitri is mountained when compared to Byleth Rhea and the rest of the characters in the game. Not to mention you could absurdly highball him to potentially continent with how Fire Limb scaling often goes. Especially the missile feat with Rhea, how she literally just doesn't care. She's being struck with missile after missile after missile. Woman takes that stuff rapid fire and is still alive. Comes to speed, he speed blitzes Guts fairly well. Guts is, you can compare him to someone who can dodge lightning, but it's like not a consistent thing. And meanwhile, Dimitri is comfortably FTL, or at least around that area, giving him a massive speed advantage. Durability, I wouldn't even argue that Guts is more durable. I'd argue that his armor will allow him to last longer. But when Dimitri has such a notable power advantage, not to mention he can boost his strength in a variety of ways and just double his potential already super effective damage with Atrocity onto Guts' face, it's not looking good. And then not to mention Dimitri has just essentially has all other advantages. He has more ranged options that he can use with his lightning magic and his throwable weapons. He has far more potential ways to end the fight immediately, especially with lethality, where he can literally just one-shot his opponent if he ever so chooses to. Not to mention that his skills also provide him a bunch of extra boosts in power. The fact he can heal himself not only with magic but with his healing items. There's not really a lot Guts can do in response. And arsenal-wise, Guts has a giant sword, a cannon arm, he can use his arm as a flamethrower, he has a crossbow, and he's got an armor which will kill him slower than Dimitri will. As far as I'm concerned, this fight is certainly not easy for Dimitri, but realistically speaking, Guts should have basically no way to win. Unless you hyper downball Dimitri and really try to sell me on the fact that, oh, he's affected by blades in this one cutscene, when his guard is down and he actually takes a hit knowing he'll kill Edelgard. Even if that was the case, you know, a massive speed advantage and a bunch of items and skills that massively boost your power and evasion, Guts is gonna have a hard time hitting Dimitri, let alone killing him. So for this episode, I'm going with Dimitri, and I hope this has been informative. It helped people that are unfamiliar with the game kind of get an understanding of what Dimitri has access to. And keep in mind, I did not list all the potential skills or potential weapons Dimitri could theoretically use, but I mainly stuck to his canonical stuff. Though in-game, technically he can use whatever he wants, so if you want to go crazy in the comment section, feel free. All that being said, this has been Ten. Peace.